Guten Abend, herzlich willkommen im Literaturhaus Berlin. Mein Name ist Sonja Longolius und ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich hier im großen Saal heute Abend zu einem Debütroman. Ich bin sehr glücklich, dass Louise Kennedy heute bei uns ist und ihren wunderbaren Roman Übertretung vorstellen wird. Wir werden heute zweisprachig sein. Es wird eine englische Lesung natürlich geben. Es wird ein Gespräch auf Englisch geben und zwischendurch werde ich ein wenig aus der deutschen Übersetzung lesen dürfen. Ich freue mich sehr, dass der Übersetzer Bernhard Robben heute bei uns ist und das Gespräch auf Englisch führen wird. Ja, congratulations to this wonderful debut novel that you've written and that you brought us to today. I'm very happy. And please welcome Louise Kennedy, and we will start right away.
Thank you. Thank you. Ich fange an mit einer Einführung, die ist auf Deutsch, ungefähr 5 Minuten lang. Danach gibt es sofort eine Lesung, und zwar die englische Lesung. Und dann gibt es im Wechsel Gespräch und Lesung. Die beiden weiteren Lesungen sind auf Deutsch aus der Übersetzung von Claudia Gledewinkel und Hans-Christian Oeser. Das darf ich als Übersetzer natürlich nicht vergessen zu erwähnen. Was ich erwähnen möchte, ist, dass es eine fantastische Übersetzung ist. Die lege ich Ihnen gerne ans Herz. Zur Einführung. Übertretung. Der Debütroman von Louise Kennedy heißt im Original Trespasses. Ein Wort, das vor allem in Verboten und Verneinungen vorkommt. Do not trespass steht auf Schildern, no trespassing. Und wenn man das liest, geht es nicht weiter, man hat eine Grenze erreicht. Manche dieser Grenzen sind 1975, in dem Jahr also, in dem der Roman spielt, nicht zu übersehen, etwa die Grenze zwischen Nord- und Südirland, die von Soldaten, Stacheldraht und Wachposten geschützt wird. Andere, ebenfalls geografische Grenzen sind jedoch unsichtbar. Grenzen, die in den Zeiten der Troubles für jeden Bewohner Nordirlands Stadt und Land durchziehen, die jede Straße, jedes Haus zuordnen, die jeden Weg von hier nach da zu einem Zickzackkurs machen können. Denn wer diese unsichtbaren Grenzen übertritt, wer in die falsche Straße einbiegt und von einer protestantischen in eine katholische Gegend wechselt, begibt sich in Lebensgefahr. Do not trespass. Geografische Grenzen, ob sichtbar oder nicht, sind allerdings nicht die einzigen Grenzen. Laut Oxford Dictionary bedeutet to trespass nicht nur to enter someone's land or property without permission, sondern auch to commit an offense against a person or a set of rules. Und auch diese Regeln sind eiserne, unumstößliche und ungeschriebene Regeln, gegen die im Nordirland der 1970er Jahre niemand verstößt, der nicht sein Leben riskieren will. Louise Kennedy wurde in Hollywood, Nordirland, geboren. Ihr Vater arbeitete für den Belfaster Telegraph, später für die Molkereigenossenschaft Dale Farm. Louise ging zur St. Patrick's Primary School in Hollywood. Ihren Großeltern gehörte der Pub The Seaside Tavern. Doch nachdem der zum zweiten Mal ausgebombt worden war, zog die Familie ins südirische Sligo. Louise war damals 12 Jahre alt. Sie studierte Sozialwissenschaften am University College in Dublin, wollte Sozialarbeiterin werden, aber das war nichts für sie. Sie zog nach London, arbeitete in einer Bank und war todunglücklich, sodass sie nach Irland zurückkehrte, sich Geld borgte, einen Schnellkurs fürs Zubereiten von Cordon Bleu belegte, als Köchin anfing und fast 30 Jahre in Restaurants arbeitete, unter anderem in Beirut. 2014, kurz vor der Finanzkrise, Timing ist alles, eröffnete sie ihr eigenes Restaurant gegen Pleite, versank in Depressionen und begann zu schreiben. Mit 48 Jahren fing sie erneut an zu studieren und machte ihren Doktor in Creative Writing an der Queen's University in Belfast. The End of the World is a Cul-de-sac, ein Band Kurzgeschichten, erschien 2021. Übertretung ist ihr erster Roman, der gleich in 21 Sprachen übersetzt wurde und zurzeit verfilmt wird. Für ihr Werk wurde sie vielfach ausgezeichnet. Zurück ins Jahr 1975. Kushla Lavery ist 24 Jahre alt. Sie unterrichtet Drittklässler an einer katholischen Schule und wohnt bei ihrer alkoholkranken Mutter Gina. Ihr Vater ist vor wenigen Jahren gestorben. Eamon, ihr Bruder, hat den Pub übernommen, in dem Kuschler abends beim Bedienen der Gäste aushilft. Erzählt wird vom Alltag während der Troubles, von den britischen Soldaten mit ihren gepanzerten Fahrzeugen, den Schikanen wahlloser Straßenkontrollen, dem allmorgendlichen Blick unter das Auto, um sicherzustellen, dass dich keine Bombe auf dem Weg zur Arbeit in die Luft sprengt, dem Geplänkel abends am Tresen. Eben dort, am Tresen im Pub, lernt Kuschler ihn eines Abends kennen. Michael Agnew, Prozessanwalt aus Belfast. Und es passiert, was in Nordirland nicht passieren darf. Kuschler übertritt gleich mehrere Grenzen. Sie verliebt sich in diesen Mann, der so doppelt so alt ist wie sie, der verheiratet ist und Protestant. Sie lernen sich näher kennen und Michael fragt Kuschler, ob sie nicht Lust habe, ihm und einigen Freunden irisch beizubringen. Gegen alle Vernunft lassen die beiden sich auf eine Affäre ein. In einem zweiten Strang erzählt Übertretung von Davy, einem von Kuschlers 7-jährigen Schülern, Sohn eines katholischen Vaters und einer protestantischen Mutter in einem rein protestantischen Wohnviertel. Ein Junge, der gemobbt, eine Familie, die von den Nachbarn schikaniert wird. Fäden werden gesponnen, die ganz unscheinbar beginnen. Der eine am Tresen, der andere an einem regennassen Tag, an dem Davy seinen Mantel zu Hause vergessen hat. Erst gegen Ende werden diese Fäden zu einem festen, brutalen Knoten zusammengezurrt. Alles in Ordnung mit uns? Fragt Michael eines Abends, ein Glas Whisky in der Hand. Wir sind dem Untergang geweiht, antwortet Kuschler. Davon abgesehen geht's uns super. Übertretung ist ein historischer Roman über eine gespaltene Gesellschaft und damit ein hochaktueller Roman. Er ist ein politischer Roman, ein Kriminalroman und eine Liebesgeschichte. Vor allem aber ist er, wie die Irish Times zu Recht feststellt, das mit Abstand beste Buch des Jahres. Danke. And now we come to the reading.
Right. I'm thanking you for that introduction, even though I didn't understand any of it. But thank you.
You've been in Germany now for nearly 48 hours.
Nearly.
I presumed your German was like...
No, I'm afraid not.
No, not much. I'll give you another 12 hours.
Kuschler wrapped her handbag in her coat and pushed it into the gap between the beer fridge and the till. Her brother Eamon was bent over the counter with a stock list. He looked up at her and his eyes narrowed. He inclined his head at the mirror that ran the length of the bar. Kuschler leaned in to check her reflection. Father Slattery had marked her with a thick cross, 1 inch wide and 2 inches long. The rub of her finger raised the piney, resinous scent of whatever blessed unguent the ashes were mixed with and blurred the cruciate shape to a sooty smudge. Eamon slapped a wet serviette into her hand. "Hurry up," he hissed. Most of the men who drank in the pub did not get ashes on Ash Wednesday, or do the Stations of the Cross on Good Friday, or go to Mass on Sunday. It was one thing to drink in a Catholic-owned bar, quite another to have your pint pulled by a woman smeared in papish war paint. Kuschler buffed until the skin on her forehead was pink, the serviette blackened, flittered. She tossed it in the bin. Eamon muttered something under his breath. The only word Kuschler could make out was Egypt. The regulars were lined along the counter. Jimmy O'Kane, the single egg he bought for his tea, bulging in his breast pocket. Minty, the school caretaker, who got through so much Carlsberg Special Brew, the pub won an award for having the highest sales in Northern Ireland, even though he was the only customer who drank the stuff. Fidel, in his khaki cap and tinted glasses. By day he measured mint imperials and clove rock in his mother's sweet shop. By night he was brigadier of the local branch of the Ulster Defence Association. A fitter from the shipyard called Leslie, who didn't speak until he was drunk and one night told Kuschler he'd love to bath her. Another man, middle-aged with a whisky in front of him, dark-eyed, faintly jowly. He was wearing a black suit and a stiff white shirt from which the collar had been detached, clothes that were conspicuous among the overalls in drip-dry fabric. His hair was flat to the ears, then wavy at the nape of his neck, as if it had been sweating under a hat or a wig. Kushla climbed onto a stool to turn up the volume on the television. When she climbed down, the man with the whiskey was flicking at the filter of his cigarette with his thumb as if he had just looked away. The news started the way it always did, with a montage of short scenes. A riot. A boy of 6 or 7 climbing up the side of a Saracen personnel carrier to poke a stone into one of the slits from which the soldiers pointed their guns. A march on Stormont, thousands moving up the long avenue to the Parliament building. They had added a new one, a single parked car on an empty street. It looked like a photograph until the car bulged and exploded into a great ball of smoke and fire, and its doors somersaulted away from it, glass from the surrounding buildings falling like hail on the tarmac. The segment finished where it always did, on an image of Mary Peters holding up her Olympic medal. "She won that 3 years ago," Eamon said. "It's the last thing that happened here we can be proud of," said the man. "Right enough, Michael," said Eamon. How did Eamon know his name? Fidel inclined his head at the newsreader. "Barry's had the beard trimmed," he said, looping his own brush around his thumb and teasing it into a long, tapered point. The news. A country road. A police Land Rover parked sideways across its white lines, a pair of legs draped in cloth protruding from a bald whitethorn hedge. Men in balaclavas behind a Formica table, woolly faces pressed to a row of microphones, lit sporadically by camera flashes. A pub with no windows, damp smoke wheezing from a crater in the roof. The last item on the news was a human interest story. Everybody liked this part because it was usually something non-partisan they could comment on. A reporter had been sent into the city centre to ask people what they thought of streaking. "It's ridiculous," said a woman in a knitted hat. "Sure, it's far too cold." There were sniggers round the bar. A tiny man, slick with Brill cream, said he'd do it if somebody paid him enough. The next man barked, "It's obscene," and walked off. Then they stopped a girl with long dark hair and big eyes. She was wearing an Afghan coat, the collar fluffed up around her face. "I think it's fantastic," she said. "Something different." She seemed stoned. "She has the look of you about her, Kushla," said Minty. "Would you be up for a bit of streaking yourself?" "Leave my sister alone, you pervert," said Eamon, smirking. Normally, Kushla would have had a reply that would shut them all up, but she was aware of the man with the neat whiskey and the tidy nails.
Thank you very much. In my introduction, I mentioned 2 definitions of the word trespass from the Oxford Dictionary. But the word occurs in a Catholic prayer, Our Fathers, forgive us our trespasses. It's the only plural of the word I know, forgive us our trespasses. Did you want to have that echo?
I think I did. I think I've spoken to people about this, and everybody I know can remember the first time they heard that word, and it was usually as a 4-year-old child, I suppose. Well, maybe you'd take it in subliminally in Mass, but when we learnt the Lord's Prayer, where it's forgive us our trespasses, and I just thought the word sounded kind of mad, because it isn't, as you say, it isn't used. I mean, it isn't used in normal speech, but yet everybody knew what it was. But I suppose I hoped that maybe the title would work on other levels too. Because, you know, in the novel, people are crossing class lines, they're crossing religious lines. Even, I suppose, the very heavy British Army presence in the town is a trespass for a lot of people who live there. And yeah, so I hoped it would work on all of those levels.
And it works on a geographical level too.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You have the tribal map in your head when you live in Belfast.
That's it. And yeah, very much so. Because I suppose the McGeown family, which is a kind of a slightly, in some ways it's a secondary kind of a narrative thread in the book, but they don't really have anywhere to go, so wherever they go, they're trespassing, and they have found themselves living as the only Catholics in a loyalist estate, where they're sort of under siege. So there's that too.
Your heroine is called Kushla Lavery. I remember from my time in Belfast a pub called Laverys.
Yes.
Is that a coincidence?
It is no coincidence. So Laverys Bar is a very very large bar which is very near to Queen's University, where I was
All the students
I'm mature in years student, but probably not very mature in other ways, where myself and my classmates used to go to drink pints after class, not literally directly after class, I have to say, but yeah, in the evenings. When I was a student in Belfast, I went to stay with my aunt, who lives on the Malone Road, which is where Cushla goes with Michael when they have a relationship for the Irish classes. And I was in my aunt's house one morning, and I was slow to move, I'll put it that way. And my cousin came into the house and said, "Where's Louise?" And I heard my aunt say, "Oh, she'll not be up for a while. She was out with them wee poets again." So yeah, that's where the Lavery came from.
Wonderful. Can I ask you what triggered the novel? Actually, is it really your first?
Yeah. God almighty, yeah, it totally is.
Reading this, I was pretty sure you'd written about 20 novels before, and this is the first one published.
No. You didn't see the draft one. It was very, very, very bad and very messy. So,
bad in what way?
It was just a complete mess. It was madness, 64,000 words of absolute drivel.
Don't believe a word.
No, it was. I mean, there are probably about 3 paragraphs in the first draft that are pretty much unchanged. So I don't know what happened. Something came to me as I sat at the desk, but for the rest of it, it was just bonkers and very bad. So I mean, this book has been through 9 very thorough drafts.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the actual question was, what triggered the novel?
There were probably 2 things, and maybe it sort of happened in 2 phases. So as I said, that when I was a student in Queen's University in Belfast, I didn't have undergrad English, and part of my creative writing PhD had a critical element to it, and I had done lots of research on a forgotten, I think very unfairly forgotten Irish writer called Nora Holt, and I'd found this archive, and I could probably, accept that I'll never do it, write a biography or something, but because I have all this stuff, but I didn't know how to write it up. So I went to meet with my supervisor one day, and he said, what's going on with the critical element? And I said, I'm writing a novel. And I wasn't, but I just thought, oh, shit, like I can't say I'm doing nothing with it. So I thought, okay, sure, I'll just try and write a novel. So I went home and I made a couple of Spotify playlists of music from the 1970s. Why
the 1970s?
I think that sort of helps. I don't know. Not to sound, well, I probably will sound like a wanker, but anyway, I'm going to say it anyway. It was kind of like, I mean, I think I was trying to make some sort of mood board in a way, like this kind of sonic mood board, and some of that involved making Spotify playlists, and it was really, there are some songs mentioned in here, and that was really the soundtrack of my early childhood, I guess. I also spent many hours watching absolutely bonkers videos of Belfast in the 70s, including, the RUC made this like really mad propaganda video where everybody knew the way that the RUC operated, or in some ways I guess they had to operate in a particular way because they were in a place that was behaving as if it was at war, except that nobody wanted to admit that. But this film showed them chasing sheep across the road and giving directions to tourists, like no tourists were going next or near the place. Being helpful like normal police might be. And I wrote maybe 2,000 or 3,000 words, but I didn't get anywhere with it. And then, so that was maybe autumn 2018, and then I just couldn't bear to look at it and I didn't know how to proceed. But then in March 2019, I got a diagnosis for malignant melanoma, and I had to have surgery, and that meant that I didn't go to work for 3 months. I knew I was going to have 3 months off work, and my way of dealing with cancer has been to largely pretend it's not happening. So, and that was, from the very outset, I just didn't want to deal with it. So I decided to try to write 1,000 words a day. and that I would forgive myself if sometimes I was a bit flaky. And this was all to distract myself from the prospect that I might be dying. So I didn't make it to the desk every day, but it meant that after 11 weeks I had something that could charitably be called a novel, in that it was long. Yeah.
In your acknowledgement, you write, "It seems I've written a novel."
Yeah, that's
you
it.
don't seem to be sure.
No, I still looking at it and thinking, I don't know how that happened, but yeah.
Okay. 1975, you were about the age
I was 8.
Kuschler's pupils. Or
Yeah.
Did you imagine yourself to be one of her pupils?
Yes, very much so. I mean, the school day that the Kuschler students have really is very much the school day that we had. So we began with a Hail Mary every day, and then we would do the news, which was, I mean, I suppose the news in various forms became a kind of structuring motif in the book, but so some genius, and apparently it happened not just in my school, in lots of schools across the north of Ireland, thought that it would be really good for us to recount the previous evening's news stories in our own words, which meant that we had a vocabulary that maybe a war reporter would be very proud of. But it didn't occur to anyone, I suppose nobody ever used the word trauma, but it didn't occur to anyone that that maybe reminding us of all of the mayhem that was around us, you know, they thought that wasn't a bad idea.
So school life is something you remembered, but it's,
I remember it very vividly.
Yeah, but the novel is 50 years ago. It's what they call a historical novel.
Well,
so
I have to say, when I heard that, I'm 56, and I'm no spring chicken. But when somebody said to me, "It's a historical novel," I was like, "What? This happened in my childhood. Like, how old am I really?" But yeah, apparently it's a historical novel.
And did you have to do a lot of research?
I had to do some research. With a lot of things, I found that I could remember them. But what I had to do was to check that I was right, that these things happened. And I drew on various things. I mean, there are things that happen in the book that happened to my family, although it is a work of fiction. There's a scene where some British soldiers come into the pub the day after Bloody Sunday and are chewing glass and generally making a nuisance of themselves, and that happened. There is a recollection of the Ulster Workers' Council strike in 1974. Each of those things happened. The priest is very much based on a real person.
Father Slattery.
Father Slattery. He had
Father
a different
Slaughter.
Slaughter, exactly. He had a different name, but he was very much like that character. And then there were things that I felt and also there were things that I don't know, I remember sort of trivia very well. So there were things that, you know, I could remember what was number 1 on my birthday when I was 8, this sort of thing. I don't know why I remember things like that, but I do. But then I could check and I was usually right. And then sometimes, because I was I think I became conscious fairly quickly that because I was inventing a story around a time that was very painful, very difficult for people. There's still a lot of pain around it. We didn't have anything remotely like a truth and reconciliation process. So, and also there's been a relatively small number of convictions for murders, and it means that a lot of people are still walking around feeling terribly aggrieved and feel that they didn't get justice. So I felt a responsibility to try to make the textures of the world as real as possible. And so some of the chapters in the book begin with the children recounting the news, but the news begins many of the chapters in other ways. So sometimes it's the television news, or sometimes it's the radio, or sometimes it's a newspaper or something. So there were resources that I was able to draw on. There's a book called Lost Lives that was published maybe in the mid-2000s, and it's very sadly out of print. And it's about that thick. And I think up to 10 people worked. 5 people are credited with writing the book, but I think many more, you know, maybe postgrad researchers helped them. And this book documents every single killing in the Troubles from beginning to end. So it ends at 3,000 and something, you know, it's over 3,500. But it doesn't just name the people. There's quite a human aspect to it, where they might say that that this woman enjoyed going to bingo, or she had, you know, however many children, or somebody else was a student, or somebody else liked to play football, this sort of thing. But there was another thing that they did which really shocked me, and I don't know why it shocked me, because it's a small place and there tend to be connections and coincidences, and also a lot of the there was a kind of tit for tat nature to a lot of the violence, where maybe soldier might be killed, and then in retaliation 2 or 3 Catholics might be killed, or then vice versa, and that just went on and on. But at the bottom, so each of the entries was numbered, and where it was related to another death, those were numbered too, and it was actually terrifying. Some of them were, and this isn't just from multiple, like incidents where there were multiple deaths. Maybe one person died, but there would be 7 or 8 cross references beneath that. It really kind of terrifying. So. Yeah. So anyway, each of the news bulletins that's mentioned in the book pretty much corresponds with the news on that day in 1975.
Okay, so you checked, so you did research to make sure that really happened what you described in the book. But was there something that surprised you in your research? Did you find something out you didn't expect, you didn't remember? You think, oh, that's dangerous.
Well, I suppose one thing that happened was that I had to ask my family. I come from a very big family, and I had to ask. So we had a bar that was owned by my grandmother. 2 of my uncles worked in it. My mother worked in it. My father never worked in it. And an aunt worked there. And then after a couple of bomb attacks, it was sold, and most of my family left the north and moved to the south of Ireland in 1975. But there were arguments about how many bombs had been planted. So somebody said, "Oh, there were 3." And no, and then everybody else was going, "No, there were 2." And then they started to, so a lot of that wasn't very clear. And then I was interviewed by a journalist from Belfast who was able to, she found some news reports and was able to tell me the date and the time and the quantity of explosives. Okay. Yeah. So the first attempt at a bomb, I think 150 pounds of explosives were packed into a beer keg and left in the back of a car beside, in the back of a stolen car beside the door.
Did you recreate the pub of your parents? Is that
the
pub
very
in
much
the,
so.
in the novel?
Except that I imagined a porthole. I don't know where that came from. A porthole kind of shaped window. I imagined there was a circular window, which there wasn't.
That wasn't.
Wasn't there, and an anchor. Although I knew the anchor wasn't there, but I just stuck.
So it's fiction. On. It's not.
So other things are real, like the kind of jade green tweedy fabric on the banquette seating and on the stools. That was real, and the teak tables were real, and also there was some coloured glass as well.
You were 6 or 7, very precise memory.
I remember it so well, but I don't know. I think that maybe part of the reason for that is that because we left when the pub was gone in 1975, it was sold, and then we left in 1979, and I think that that really marked a very stark kind of split between what my life was like before and then afterwards, because we moved to the south of Ireland, which was a much softer place altogether. Not always in a good way, I have to say. So I think that I'm always looking back on my early life. It's in a very particularly strong relief with what happened afterwards. So it's maybe like an extreme form of nostalgia or something.
The opening scene you read, what may surprise some readers is that it's a pub run by Catholics, but in the bar are mostly Protestants and even British soldiers. How come? One should assume that in a time like that, Protestants go to a Protestant bar, Catholics to a Catholic bar. Why is that not the case?
So, until maybe the 1980s, when the Fair Employment Agency was was set up, which was where employers were forced to have a quota of Catholics and Protestants. Before that, Catholics were excluded from the workforce. So they were not employed in the shipyard, where they did manage to sneak in. It usually had pretty bad consequences. They weren't employed in... interestingly, women tended to be employed sometimes in textiles because they had dexterous, smaller fingers, and that was useful. But a lot of the men didn't have work. Anyway, there was this sort of network. I mean, I guess there were lots of forces that were sort of conspiring to exclude Catholics from commercial life and business life and from employment. But the two businesses that the Presbyterians were not interested in touching were providing drinking and gambling services. So as far as I could see, the Catholic middle class was made up of publicans, bookies, and after a while there were a few doctors and a few solicitors, because when they ran those businesses successfully, they spent the money on educating their children who went into those professions. But there was no merchant class really among Catholics. So pretty much the vast majority of bars in the north of Ireland were owned by Catholics.
The big industries of Belfast were the linen industry and the ship industry, Holland and Wolff, and they took only Protestant workers.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. It was actually the workers, the other workers, who didn't want to have Catholics coming in as well.
Oh,
so
I see.
yeah,
Okay.
it was sort of. I mean, it was pretty much systemic. Yeah.
Let's talk about Kushla for a moment. How did you get to meet her? Is she made up? Is she you? Is she someone you met? Friends?
She's probably an amalgam of a lot of the young women who were around me when I was growing up. My mother was young when I was born. She was 19, and then the aunt who I mentioned earlier, who I stayed with, was a teenager in the early 70s. And then I had aunts, and I suppose there were babysitters. And there was also a lovely teacher, I have to say, when I was 7, I think, who...
Miss McKenna.
Miss McKenna, yeah. So Miss McKenna used to... it was kind of mad. She used to come into the classroom and she would do something like stick a poster of a Monet painting on the wall and ask us to write something. One day she played a Mozart horn concerto and asked us to write something, and not a lot of kids in the class were bringing much cultural capital into the room, but if you did manage to write something, she was very encouraging, and she was very kind and kind of quite a bit younger as well, and she also drove a red Renault 5. So maybe it was a little bit
of hers in Kushla too.
I think there's a bit of her, being the kind of kind teacher. Yeah.
And in your book of short stories, there's a story I thought this might be a younger Kushla. It's called In Silhouette, and it opens very similarly in a pub with a man entering, a fascinating man. There seems to be even a moment of attraction. Something else happens.
So it goes badly wrong.
But is she a younger Kushla?
That's really interesting. So I wrote that story before I ever thought I'd write a novel, and I didn't even really think I was writing a short story then. That came out of difficulties I was having with another story, which was called Sparing the Heather, that's in the collection. And to write Sparing the Heather, I wrote 43,000 words. Bearing in mind this is a short story that's about 5,000 words long, 43,000 words. I think I tried multiple points of view and all kinds of things. And then one day I sat down and used the second person, you, for this character speaking to herself. And I had no idea what I was doing, but it didn't feel as horrendous as the rest of it did. So I just kept going and ended up with that story In Silhouette. So, it opens in a similar way where there is where a man walks into a bar. I think I probably watched too many Westerns when I was a child. The saloon doors swinging open and the stranger coming in. But also, when I was a student in Queen's University, I had to take a module on script writing. And I wrote a play, and it opened, a very bad play, but I wrote it anyway. And it opens in a bar where there is a very bored young woman behind the counter when a stranger comes in. So maybe I'd been kind of I don't know, that scenario somehow was in my head, I think, in previous things.
the scene you read to us is not actually the beginning of the novel. There's something set before, and it's set in a different time, in 2015, and that's when the novel ends at the same time. So this goes back to a visit in the Ulster Museum, to an exhibition, The Art of Trouble, the Troubles. What did you see there? What made it so important for you to include it in your novel?
There were a couple of things that happened. So in 2015, there was an exhibition in the Ulster Museum called The Art of the Troubles, and it was controversial in the way that these things often are. Some people felt that it had gone too far, that it was insensitive. Other people felt that it hadn't gone far enough. But I walked around there and saw all of these different, these representations in different forms of what had happened, and some of them were very obviously related to the Troubles. There's a very famous piece of sculpture by an artist called Effie McWilliam, and it's bronze, and it's of a woman in a skirt, and her skirt is blown right out, and it looks as though she's doing a cartwheel, but there's something wrong with the angles of her limbs, and that was inspired by a bomb in a cafe in Belfast city centre called the Abercorn, where a lot of women were just having tea, as a break from shopping. And there were horrific, several deaths and horrific injuries. And there were all sorts of other things as well. But I just remember walking around there. It was very busy the day that I visited, and people were walking around, and there was a sense of grief or something, but also nobody was really speaking, and there's so much difficulty around language in that place, and it made me think about how art can be used to say the unsayable in a place where language is so problematic. There are two words for everything. There's the Good Friday Agreement, which Catholics are quite comfortable with that, but Protestants call it the Belfast Agreement. There is the peace walls and the peace lines. It depends. You can tell a person's religion by whether they call it one or the other, which is still just bonkers, all of that. So I think I was interested in some sort of image that could speak more than words could, which is probably ridiculous when I was actually writing thousands of words. But another thing that happened around that time was that in the south of Ireland, we're coming to the end of something that's called the Decade of Commemorations, and that began in 2013, 100 years after something that's called the Dublin Lockout, and it goes right up to the formation of the state. So every year it would commemorate something. And in 2015, a sculptor who I know, a German woman actually who works in the town where I live, she was making these statues that she called ghosts, and these were in preparation for a commemoration of the Easter Rising in 1916. I went into the studio to see how she made them. I guess I kind of worked with the idea of one of her ghosts, and then applied it to an imaginary victim of the Troubles.
You said a minute ago a place where language is so problematic. The mother of Seamus Heaney told her little son, whatever you say nothing. It's a famous phrase now. Meaning, as soon as the boy opens his mouth, other people can detect if he is Catholic or Protestant. In one of his poems, he wrote, smoke signals are loud-mouthed compared to us. So what is it? I mean, could you give us an example, like this is the Protestant way of saying, this is the Catholic way of saying, so that immediately the other one knows who I am?
Okay, well, the very obvious one is if you're asked to spell a word that... I suppose the thing you're supposed to say is if you're using the word, I'm going to say H because that's what we always called it, where Protestants said H and we said H. H, yeah. So so many Catholics I know accidentally said H and found themselves like oh, you know, what have I done? What have I said? Because it was like instantly a way of identifying somebody. And it sounds ridiculous, but at a time when being in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, could result in your death, it was really pretty serious. I think it's a thing in Australia as well, weirdly, because so many Irish people went to Australia, so the H and H thing is there too.
I don't remember H and H, but I remember that my pupils in Belfast tried to teach me to say, "How now, brown cow?" This is, you can do it.
How now, brown cow?
How now, brown cow? Yes, exactly.
Although everybody says that, everybody in the north says that, yeah.
So I can only do the German version. I think it's time for a German reading before we start talking, continue talking.
Kuschler ging nach unten, schnappte sich ihren Korb vom Garderobentisch und machte sich auf den Weg zur Schule. Die Laverys wohnten in einer Reihe von roten, edwardianischen Backsteinhäusern. Die Häuser gegenüber aus derselben Zeit waren mit weißem Stuck verziert. Je weiter man in Richtung Stadt fuhr, desto kleiner und bescheidener wurden die Gebäude und der letzte Straßenabschnitt war von einfachen Reihenhäusern aus den 50er Jahren gesäumt. Im Sommer wehten überall Union Jacks aus den Fenstern. Ohne sie wirkten die kastenförmigen Häuser spartanisch. Eine kleine Gestalt bog um die Ecke in die schmale Straße, die zur Schule führte. Davy McGowan, ein Kind aus ihrer Klasse. Er war ohne Mantel unterwegs. Sie versuchte, der Pfütze auszuweichen, die sich an Regentagen vor dem Fish-and-Chips-Laden bildete, aber ein anderes Auto kam ihr entgegen. Es rauschte, als ihre Reifen das Wasser verdrängten. Sie blickte zurück und sah, wie Davy, die Arme von sich gestreckt, an sich herunterschaute. Er war von oben bis unten durchweicht. Kuschler fuhr durch das Tor auf der Rückseite der Schule, stellte rasch ihren Wagen ab und ging hinein. Gegen den Strom der eintreffenden Kinder eilte sie den Korridor entlang zum Haupteingang. Ein triefnasser Davy trat durch die Tür, die Haut rot vor Kälte. »Ich hab dich total nass gespritzt«, sagte sie. Er schüttelte sich wie ein Welpe und sie bekam eine ganze Ladung Regentropfen ab. »Es geht mir gut«, sagte er mit klappernden Zähnen. Sie brachte ihn zur Personaltoilette und rubbelte ihm Gesicht und Haare mit Papierhandtüchern ab. Sie waren so rau, dass er zusammenzuckte. Es klingelte zum Unterricht. »Das muss erst mal reichen«, sagte sie. Mr. Bradley, der Direktor, wartete im Korridor, als sie aus der Toilette kamen. Er baute sich bedrohlich vor Davy auf und fragte, »Wo ist dein Mantel?« »Vergessen, Sir.« »So«, sagte er, und es klang, als dächte er über eine angemessene Bestrafung nach. Bei Konferenzen fiel hin und wieder Davys Name. Sein Vater war Dachdecker, schien aber selten Arbeit zu haben, seine Mutter eine Protestantin, die, obwohl die Kinder katholisch erzogen wurden, nicht übergetreten war. Wenn es nach Bradley ginge, hätten sie ebenso gut zur Manson Family gehören können. »War doch nur ein Versehen«, sagte Kuschler, legte die Hände auf Davys Schultern und lenkte ihn aus der Gefahrenzone. Einige der anderen Lehrerinnen erwarteten, dass die Kinder aufstanden, sobald sie das Klassenzimmer betraten, aber Kuschler schlüpfte lieber unbemerkt hinein und lauschte ihrem Geplapper. Davy ging zu seinem Platz in der ersten Reihe, direkt vor Kuschlers Nase, wo er nicht etwa saß, weil er unartig war, sondern weil die anderen ihn quälten. Kuschler packte ihren Korb aus, hängte ihren Mantel über die Stuhllehne. Die Kinder wurden still und nahmen die Haltung ein, die sie für die Erstkommunion geübt hatten, die Hände aneinandergelegt, die Fingerspitzen gen Himmel gerichtet. Sie betete mit ihnen das Ave Maria. Ihre Münder waren das Aufsagen so gewohnt, dass die Worte verschwammen, nur noch Klang und Rhythmus waren wie eine Hymne, die bei einem Fußballspiel angestimmt wird. Vor dem Unterricht waren die Nachrichten an der Reihe. Kuschler hasste diesen Teil. Der Direktor bestand jedoch darauf. Er meinte, so würden die Kinder dazu angespornt, mehr von der Welt um sie herum wahrzunehmen. Kuschler dachte, sie wüssten ohnehin zu viel von der Welt um sie herum. Davy stand auf, wie immer der Erste, der sich freiwillig meldete. An den Schultern und am Ausschnitt war sein roter Pullover ganz dunkel vor Feuchtigkeit. »In Belfast ist eine Bombe hochgegangen«, sagte er. »Das sagt er jeden Tag«, rief Jonathan, der neben ihm saß. Nun ja, heute stimmt es. Danke, Davy, sagte Kuschler. Jonathan stand auf. Das war nicht in Belfast, sagte er. In der Nähe der Grenze ist eine für eine Fußpatrouille der britischen Armee bestimmte Sprengfalle zu früh explodiert und hat 2 Jungen getötet. Sie waren sofort tot. Sprengfalle, Brandsatz, Plastiksprengstoff, Nitroglycerin, Molotow-Cocktail, Gummigeschoss, Saracen, Internierung, Special Powers Act, Vortrupp, was heutzutage zum Wortschatz eines 7-jährigen Kindes gehört.
Was heutzutage zum Wortschatz eines 7-jährigen Kindes gehört, nicht unbedingt zu unserem, weil Saracen zum Beispiel, dürfen nicht alle wissen, ist ein gepanzerter Mannschaftswagen, die durch die Stadt patrouillierten mit geöffneten Rückklappen, aus denen Soldaten dann ihre Gewehre hielten, um in beide Richtungen sofort reagieren zu können. The Special Power Act, what was the Special Power Act?
The Special Powers Act was brought in maybe it could have been 1969, and that was a way of detaining without charge anyone who was suspected of being involved in any subversive activity. And that gave way in 1971 to the introduction of internment without trial, which meant that not only could people be held for up to a week, but they could be held for years. And that was in place from 1971 until 1975. And I think of the maybe 1,500 people who had been arrested and held under internment, maybe about 2 or 3% of those were Protestant. And a lot of this was done via raids on homes by the British government in the middle of the night. And also the week that internment was introduced, it now turns out that there were that British soldiers were kind of running amok in certain nationalist areas in Ballymurphy, for example, where 11 people were shot dead in a few hours. And
so anyone who was mistrusted, who was suspect in any way, could go to prison without trial for
up to 4 years.
4 years.
Until it ended in 1975.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something I forgot.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't remember. But
and actually, a lot of that led to the hunger strikes in 1981. So all of these things tend to lead to something else. So while the prisoners were interned, they were held in a former military barracks or something in near Lisburn on the outskirts of Belfast.
Yeah.
And they were allowed
the H block? No.
Yes. So it became the H blocks later when it was developed. Okay. But at the time of internment, they were staying in Nissen huts. But they were allowed to wear their own clothes. There was freedom of movement. There wasn't a huge amount of segregation, so the prisoners tended to mix in a way, which is kind of interesting. And then later on, they were told that they could no longer wear their own clothes and were told to wear prison uniforms, which they felt criminalised them. I'm not saying what my opinion of any of that is one way or another, but this was the argument of the Republican prisoners was that they felt that if it weren't for the political situation, they wouldn't be locked up or incarcerated, and they didn't want to wear prison uniforms like criminals. And then there were other privileges which they had even during internment, which were taken away from them.
And IRA members amongst the prisoners used the time in prison to radicalize other people?
I don't know about that. Apparently, maybe they were radicalising other people, but I would imagine that maybe if people were going to be radicalised, perhaps being pulled out of your bed in the middle of the night and being held for several years without trial might radicalise you, and maybe your fellow inmates might not have to do a lot to turn you anti-state. Yeah. I don't know.
But to have kids at the beginning of their day, school day, recite the news, it feels like sadism in a way. I mean, to make kids to war reporters. I mean, they know too much about violence anyhow.
Oh, we totally knew too much about violence. But it's sort of interesting because people use the word trauma a lot, and I don't think I heard that in my life until about, I don't know, a few years ago, because it's all like trauma this and trauma that. And that's not to say that there aren't people who are and then also the way that it's used, it confuses me, because my understanding is that maybe a trauma response is what people are getting at, or something, which is a set of symptoms. But anyway, like for example, before our bar was bombed, my grandmother was injured, very seriously injured, in another bomb attack in the town that we lived in, where she an afternoon, and she was on her way to the bank to make a lodgement to put the takings from the bar in there, and the bar was pretty busy, so there was a good bit of money in her bag, and she was on her way to the bank, and someone had planted a bomb just inside the window of another premises in town, and it exploded just as she was walking past. And on the news report initially, for the first few news flashes on TV and radio, it was reported as a fatality, because she was so badly injured, like her face is kind of blown open and her jugular vein was severed. I think an off-duty British soldier who had gone down the town for a pint held her neck together to stop her from bleeding to death, and nobody else would have known what to do. He had some first aid training, and but when she talked about that afterwards, she never ever used the word trauma. What she did was to tell a story, and the story was that she had, I think in the end it was like 300 or 400 stitches. Her heart had stopped. She had massive blood transfusions, and a lot of several procedures from plastic surgeons to try to minimise the scarring, and she was heavily sedated throughout. And when she came round, she said there was some wee man looking over me, and I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Mrs. what was in that bag?" And about what was in your handbag? And she said, "Why?" And he said, he was one of the paramedics, and he said that they almost had to break her arm to get the handbag off her with the money in it. That even as she was dying, like her heart had stopped, but she was still holding on to the handbag. So that was the nearest she ever came to acknowledging, that this had happened to her. But she clearly had signs of PTSD all her life. If there was a loud noise, she went to pieces. She struggled with alcohol and stuff for a while, and various things. But
one of the problems I'm facing is that we're talking about a novel I don't want to give too much away about, because it's also leading to a certain deed, and it's, as I said in the beginning, it's a crime fiction in a way, or one part of it is crime fiction. But one thing we might talk about is there's a house burning down, and the fire brigade is there very quickly. Why is the fire brigade there so quickly?
Because the people who have set fire to the house don't want the house to burn to the ground. They just want to get the family out.
Yeah, but they're pre-warned. They get a warning.
That happened.
Yeah. So is that the warning is given to them by the ones who are actually burning the house?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is anecdotal, but sometimes apparently the fire brigade would get a call to a house fire before the fire had started.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And they kind of, that house we're talking about is lived in by a mixed family, Protestant and Catholic. They want, the Protestants, the majority, want this family out. They want them to leave. So in the end, they burn the house. They call the fire brigade. We're going to burn the house. So that the fire brigade is there before the house burns down, because the people want to save the house. They want Protestants to move in. So this is absurd in a way. So
yeah, it was a mad place.
It's really mad.
Mad place, yeah.
Yeah, okay. You write in a little garden shed, which is tiny.
It's not that tiny.
Not anymore.
No, it's actually...
I saw pictures of it. It's very tiny.
No, it's not that tiny, really.
Okay.
So is this from the front? Did you see a picture from the front? No,
it looked like 2 square meters.
No. So I didn't build the shed. But when we bought our house, there was someone had years ago, before previous owners had a shed, but it was built of bricks. It was very solid, and it had a roof. And then a subsequent owner, the woman we bought the house from, was an osteopath, and she used it as a clinic. So she put some insulation in the walls and some paneling, and then put this little wooden structure on the front of it, which is probably what you saw. So that was just her little waiting room with a toilet.
Oh,
so there's quite a big room in behind there. Yeah.
So in that writing shelf, you have some books.
I have way too many books.
Way too many books?
Yeah.
Because I thought it's so tiny, you probably have a handful of books only.
It's very big. There are like 9 Billy bookcases around the walls, and then more books everywhere. Yeah, so it's pretty big.
There are 4 books, if I counted correctly, that are mentioned in the novel. It's The Black Prince. It's Jude the Obscure. It's Kieran Carson's poems. And it's a novel called Betsy Gray, or The
Hearts of Down.
Hearts of Down.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was living in Bangor. There's a cafe called Betsy Gray.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
At the corner of 6th Street, something, on my way to school.
Betsy Gray is a controversial figure.
Who is she? Why is she in the book?
Okay, so there were various attempts throughout. After I suppose the place was colonised by Britain, there were various attempts over the centuries to rebel against that, and one of the kind of, I think probably in some ways the most interesting one was a rebellion in 1798, and it was interesting in that. In the northeast of the country, which was largely Protestant, even then, it was a rebellion mostly by Presbyterians, Presbyterians, yeah, okay. And that is a really difficult thing in their history. They're just very much not interested in that at all.
The reputation is to be very conservative.
It's to be very conservative, yeah. I suppose it was led by a man called Henry Joy McCracken, I think, and some others. So these would have been the sons of Presbyterian mill owners and so on, and it was very much based on the ideals of 1789. It was influenced by that, and it was he was executed. I think he was hung, drawn, and quartered in public, and it was all very ghastly, and it was quelled. But Betsy Gray was supposedly a young woman from a town called Ballynahinch in County Down, who was very brave during the rebellion of 1798, where she helped her brothers and her father. And so in 1798 this happened, and then in 1898 someone thought that this ought to be commemorated, and there was uproar over it, where I think there was a presumption that maybe Presbyterians from the area might be very proud of her, but actually they were appalled because she wanted to rid the place of England, and that wasn't by then what Presbyterians in the north wanted. I think things maybe changed with industrialisation in the kind of mid-19th century, that sectarianism was used to divide the workers, and that ended any kind of Presbyterian interest in getting rid of Britain.
The first part of your book is The Irish for No, which is the title of Kieran Carson's poem collection. Why is that important?
The Irish for No?
Yeah, why did you have it in the book? The Irish don't have a yes either.
No, there isn't. That's true, yeah. There's no yes either. Yeah.
So why the Irish for No?
I think that maybe it relates a little bit to what I was saying earlier about language and the difficulty. So it isn't just with having a different vocabulary or different words for things. I remember as a child, I heard from someone that there were some people where we lived who were learning Irish, and they were Protestants. And I went home, and I thought this sounded fantastic. And I went home and told my father, and he went, "What would they be doing learning Irish? What's that for?" And I thought to myself that maybe, I don't know, I think that when Cushla, who had learned the Irish language when she was a student, then I suppose she meets Michael, and he uses it as a way to to see her, where she is ostensibly trying to teach the Irish language to himself and a few of his bourgeois bohemian friends up the Malone Road. And but really they're not very serious about it. Michael does his homework, but the others aren't serious about it at all. Also, I think what was in my mind was that when I was a child, the Irish language was never, ever, ever used in the media and BBC Northern Ireland. Gaelic games such as hurling and Gaelic football, the results were never covered, but they covered the results of every other sport you could possibly imagine. And I think for nationalists, like, Catholic, nationalist, Republican, whatever you want to call people from my community, we didn't see ourselves represented anywhere in public life. And the schools were where, I suppose, people sent their children to gain their history, their culture, learn their language and play those games or something as well. So I think I was always very interested in the idea that these people are doing something which they think is sort of a little bit transgressive.
Kieran Carson wrote the poem in 1985, as far as I remember, and in reaction to a protest called Ulster Says No. And I always thought the Irish for no is the title of the poem because the Irish can't even say what the Ulster says, what Ulster wants. Ulster says no, the Irish couldn't even say it
can't even
because
say it,
they don't have a word for it.
Yeah.
So that's something I thought very, very astonishing. Let's talk about...
In a rare attempt at humour and jollity, there was a very large Ulster Says No banner above Belfast City Hall, and for the month of December somebody put an EL on the end of it. Ulster Says Noel, and then it was taken down. It went back to sectarian misery again after that.
You just mentioned Michael, and I thought, okay, we haven't spoken about Michael this evening. Is he a guy to your liking?
Okay, this is a great question, because lots of younger women who've read the book are absolutely disgusted by Cushla and Michael. Especially American readers, they just can't deal with it at all. They're like, oh my God, this is so... If I have to read another book where a young woman falls for an older guy and he's so disgusting and he talks down to her. It was 1975. It's very much of its time, I think. Michael does talk down to Cushla a little, but when I was a child, I remember, I don't think I even heard the word sexism. I certainly didn't hear the word misogyny. The word that was used was chauvinism, as if, making it sound a bit French made it a bit less obnoxious or something. Bit of chauvinism there, there were images of women, literally women with like topless women on beer cans and things, and the Benny Hill show was on all the time, and there was all of that. So I think they're very much of their time. I also think that Cushla doesn't really have a lot going on in her life. Her father has recently died, so I guess maybe she has daddy issues to some extent. She's bored out of her mind. She's in a house with her mother, who is drinking very heavily. And
she describes herself as being an outcast, being an outsider.
Yeah, and I think there is a thing. Because
no friends anymore.
Yeah, because I think that happened... this used to be said to us, it was like, oh, it's well for you, he's living over there. But I think that what they didn't realise was that literally my uncles were standing behind the bar afraid of doing something wrong and ending up on a loyalist hit list. Whereas some other people would have been quite protected. I think that if when people stayed in their own areas, to some extent they could protect themselves, but once you left your own area and went elsewhere and started to mix, then it could become quite dangerous.
But she has the job as a teacher, but apart from that, it's kind of a very isolated life because she's living at home with her mum. Well, all of the bars in Belfast city centre basically closed at 5:30 every day, and there was a security cordon. All of the bars within the city centre were closed. From 1971, I think, when the very big bomb explosion happened
in McGurk's bar, which is a Catholic-owned bar not far from the city centre, until the Omagh bombing in 1998, which was, I think McGurk's had the highest number of deaths in a single attack, and people didn't really want to go out anymore. You know, it wasn't safe to go out. Also, if you did leave, then you were likely to come across some kind of a roadblock or a British Army patrol or something who were asking you where you were going. So people tended not to go out very much. So I think that people did. You know, it wasn't implausible to me that Cushla could be quite isolated. And then also, I guess, her social life is, if you could call it that, is helping her brother in the bar. And the men who are drinking in the pub are a fairly sorry lot, you know. They're not very high-functioning alcoholics, a lot of them. So I think maybe when Michael walks in, then her head is turned. Yeah.
But it's Hollywood. It's fairly safe compared to Belfast. Wasn't there, what's it called, the Europa Hotel?
The Europa, yeah.
It became famous for being the
most bombed hotel in Europe.
In the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a fame.
I know.
Yeah.
Apparently, so they used to, whenever things were quiet, they used to just bomb the Europa because it would make some headlines. Because it's like, yeah. Oh, because I think it was in competition with Beirut for a while.
When Davy visits the house of Cushla, he thinks it's a mansion because his house he's living in is so small, so few rooms, and then he comes to Cushla and thinks it's a mansion. When Cushla comes to the house of Michael, there's the same feeling of trespassing, of crossing a border into another class. How important is this theme of class and class differences in your novel?
I didn't understand. I didn't realise I was so preoccupied with this until maybe until I had readers who were saying to me, "Oh my God," you know, because they didn't understand. I think that class operates in a particular way in societies that are divided along particular lines, and the place that I lived in was divided along lines that were largely religious. There were some very small exceptions, but it isn't inaccurate to say that there was a dominant class, and then there was, I suppose, a kind of an underclass, and I belonged to that. But within that, there was a class system. And because my family had a bar that was very busy, my family lived in nice houses and were able to buy cars and change their cars and educate their children. But within that Catholic class system, there were people who were at the very bottom. It wasn't, and that was very often encouraged by the Catholic Church, which is an organisation that's very snobbish, like many other organisations. So it wasn't the case that we were all downtrodden and persecuted together. You know, I could see even as a child that there were some families in the town, some Catholic families in the town, who I couldn't understand why they weren't being helped more. I don't know. So I think there was that. But then, so Cushla, you know, lives in this little bubble where they are a little bit, you know, they're posh. They're kind of the top of this little class system. But it's when she leaves that and goes to this house on the Malone Road, she realises that she's not posh at all. Yeah.
And we're now going to hear a scene where she comes into a world she doesn't really know, a bohemian world where food has French names and crackers taste in a way she didn't expect. And let's hear it.
Michael bog in eine der Seitenstraßen. An der Ecke stand eine Armeekaserne, eine elegante, unauffällige Festung, das alte Herrenhaus und die taubengrau gestrichenen Zäune, am Rand des Gartens ein Wachturm auf Stelzen, so harmlos wie ein Baumhaus. Am Ende der Straße fuhr er zwischen zwei imposanten Pfosten hindurch in eine mit Moos bewachsene, asphaltierte Einfahrt und parkte den Wagen so geschickt, als hätte er das schon viele Male getan. Auf jeder Seite der schweren Eingangstür mit ihrer dicken Schicht aus marineblauem Glanzlack stand ein angeschlagener Topf mit Primeln. Michael drückte den Klingelknopf. Während der Fahrt hatte Kuschler sich etwas entspannt, jetzt aber war ihr beklommen zumute. Jim machte ihn auf, in Strümpfen, die 2 Stärkenbrille ins Haar geschoben, wie Frauen es mit Sonnenbrillen tun. »Freundchen«, sagte er. »Beeindruckend«, sagte Michael. Er legte seine Hand auf ihren Rücken, die Berührung kaum spürbar, aber absichtsvoll. Sie warf ihm einen Blick zu. »Nach Ihnen, Miss Lavery«, sagte er und schob sie vor sich ins Haus. Die Diele war hoch und breit und vollgestopft, über den Wandleisten ein burgunderroter Anstrich, darunter tabakfarbene Anaglypta-Tapete. Ein geschwungener Holzstuhl aus den 30er Jahren, das Sitzkissen bezogen mit William Morris-Stoff. Ein großes Aquarell, das einen Hügel unter einem kalten blauen Himmel zeigte, das abgestorbene Riedgras und das Heidekraut korallenrot. Sie blieb vor dem Bild stehen. Ist das Licht nicht wundervoll?« fragte Michael. »Sieht aus wie irgendwo in Amerika, wie man es aus Filmen kennt, Arizona oder Nevada«, sagte sie. »Das war im Januar in Donegal. Penny liebt das Licht im Winter«, sagte Jim. In der Küche war es warm, es roch nach Knoblauch. Penny hatte sich über ihr schwarzes Strickkleid eine ausgewaschene, rosagrün karierte Schürze mit einem ausgestellten Rockteil gebunden. »Kuschler hat dein Aquarell bewundert«, sagte Michael und küsste sie auf beide Wangen. »Danke, das einzige Bild von mir, das ich mag«, sagte Penny. »Inzwischen vertrödele ich meine Zeit mit Bildhauerei.« Jim schenkte ihnen aus einer Korbflasche Wein ein und wieder prosteten sie einander wortlos zu. Erst nachträglich fiel ihnen ein, auch mit ihr anzustoßen. Auf einem langen Regal über dem Küchenfenster viktorianische Geleeformen in allen möglichen Größen und Schattierungen. Hinter dem Esstisch ein Geschirrschrank aus abgebeiztem Kiefernholz, vollgestopft mit silbernen Teekannen und Porzellanterrinen, Einmachgläsern und Dosen mit französischen Etiketten. Pâté de Champagne, Beurre de Homard, Confit de Canard. Mit beiden Händen stellte Penny eine schwere blau-weiße Servierplatte auf den Tisch. Darauf lagen anämisch aussehende Cracker, die mit etwas bestrichen waren, das babyrosa glänzte, wie Angel Delight Dessertcreme. Jim reichte Kuschler die Packung. Sie zeigte das Porträt eines Mannes mit einer Perücke, die aussah wie ein Schaffell. »Das ist Dr. Oliver aus Bath. Nach ihm wurden die Cracker benannt«, sagte er. »Erinnert er Sie an irgendjemanden?« »Zieh Leine«, sagte Michael. Jim stand auf, weil es an der Tür geklopft hatte. Stimmen in der Diele, laut, dann leise, als wollten sie nicht gehört werden. Es versetzte Kuschler einen Stich, als ihr klar wurde, dass sie das Gesprächsthema war. Sie erkannte Viktor aus Fernsehsendungen zum Zeitgeschehen. Er war klein und drahtig, trug eine khakifarbene Weste, in deren Brusttasche Stifte steckten, und war ein wenig außer Atem, was so wirkte, als wäre er eben noch durch Saigon gerannt. Jane hatte karamellfarbenes Haar und große, von spinnenbeinartigen Wimpern gerahmte braune Augen und hauchte ein »Hallo«. Vom Wein hatte Kuschler einen so trockenen Mund, als hätte sie bitteren schwarzen Tee getrunken. Sie nahm einen Cracker und biss hinein. »Wie finden Sie ihn?« fragte Penny. »Lecker«, sagte sie, »aber ich hätte nicht gedacht, dass er nach Fisch schmeckt.« Sie lachten. Ob mit ihr oder über sie, vermochte sie nicht zu sagen. Alle außer Viktor, der mit eiligen Zügen eine Zigarre paffte und sie durch den Rauch hindurch musterte. »Michael hat uns erzählt, dass Sie Muttersprachlerin sind«, sagte er leicht suffisant. Wieder musste Kuschler daran denken, was Gary gesagt hatte. »Irisch war eins meiner Wahlfächer«, sagte sie. Sie sagte nicht »my A-Levels«, sondern »me A-Levels« und spürte, wie sie rot anlief. Penny räumte die Servierplatte ab und ließ Besteck mit beinernen Griffen und ein Bündel Leinservietten auf den Tisch fallen. Sie nahm eine ovale Auflaufschale aus Steingut aus dem Ofen und stellte sie auf einen rostigen Dreifuß in der Mitte des Tisches. Unter der braunen Kruste blubberte es und von den Seiten tropfte dunkle Flüssigkeit herunter. Kuschler erhob sich. »Kann ich irgendwie behilflich sein?« fragte sie. Penny rieb eine hölzerne Salatschüssel mit einer Knoblauchzehe aus. Sie gab Kuschler ein Geschirrtuch und bat sie, die Teller aus dem Wärmeofen zu nehmen. Hinter ihnen, sagte Michael, Diplock-Gerichte, keine Geschworenen, dafür bin ich nicht angetreten. Die Ofeneinsätze waren nah beieinander und Kuschler spürte, wie sie sich versenkte, als ihr Handgelenk das heiße Metall berührte. Sie war kurz davor, in Tränen auszubrechen, nicht weil es schmerzte, sondern weil sie so frustriert war. Sie legte sich das Geschirrtuch zurecht, ging um den Tisch herum und verteilte die Teller. Michael beobachtete sie, als sie seinen vor ihn stellte. »Sie haben sich verbrannt«, sagte er. Die Wunde leuchtete rot und es bildete sich bereits eine Blase. Er führte sie zum Spülbecken, ließ kaltes Wasser laufen und hielt ihre Hand darunter. Sein Daumen lag auf ihrem Handgelenk, dort, wo man den Puls misst. Das Herz schlug ihr bis zum Hals. Am liebsten wäre sie auf der Stelle davongerannt. »Arme Kuschler«, sagte Penny, »ich hätte es selbst machen sollen.« Ihr Ton war freundlich, aber es war genau das, was auch Emmon und Gina gesagt hätten. Kuschler schlüpfte auf ihren Platz. Die anderen reichten Penny ihre Teller. Kuschler hätte sie gar nicht auszuteilen brauchen, aber das hatte ihr niemand gesagt. »Moussaka«, sagte Jane, als Penny eine Portion aus der Schale schaufelte. »Wo hast du die Auberginen her?« »Laila hat sie im Koffer mitgebracht, als sie zur Lesewoche nach Hause gekommen ist, zusammen mit dem Tarama-Salata.« »Sie haben eine Tochter?«, fragte Kuschler. Penny stellte eine Schüssel mit knackigem Kopfsalat, angemacht mit Zitronensaft und Öl, auf den Tisch und einen Korb mit knusprigem Brot, das sie eher auseinandergerissen als geschnitten hatte. »Wir haben 2. Laila studiert in Cambridge und Alice an der Harriet Ward«, erklärte sie, als müsste Kuschler wissen, wo das war. Jane erzählte ihnen von einem brasilianischen Vertrag, an dem sie im Auftrag eines Ingenieursbüros arbeitete. »Jane ist Übersetzerin aus dem Portugiesischen«, sagte Michael. »Haben Sie viel zu tun?«, fragte Kuschler. »Es ist so lukrativ, wie es klingt«, sagte Victor, woraufhin Jane ihr Besteck hinlegte. Während der Mahlzeit sprach sie nur noch, wenn sie angesprochen wurde, und das geschah nicht eben häufig. Zum Nachtisch gab es Irish Coffee und in Stücke gebrochene, krümeliges Weichkaramell. »Sonja«, sagte Jim, wieder dieser Akzent. Michael zog sein Jackett aus. Sie hatte ihn noch nie in Hemdsärmeln gesehen und konnte den Blick nicht von seinen Schultern abwenden, dem Körperteil, der ihr bei einem Mann immer zuerst auffiel. »Genau«, sagte Jim, »lass uns loslegen.« Alle sahen Kuschler an. Sie nahm die Bücher aus ihrem Korb und legte sie auf den Tisch. »Unterhalten Sie sich, dann sehen wir, wo Sie stehen.« Victor zündete sich eine neue Zigarette an. »Verraten Sie uns das irische Wort für Nein, Kuschler.« Sie wusste, worauf er hinaus wollte. Im Irischen gab es kein Wort für Nein.
Herzlichen Dank. Die Übersetzung von Claudia Glenewinkel und Hans-Christian Oeser, das sei ruhig noch einmal erwähnt. Why do these Bohemians want to learn Irish? That's not a real interest in the language, is it?
I don't know. I think Kushla has a friend who she works with called Jerry, who observes that he thinks that they're playing at being Irish. And I must say that I was fascinated. I think from what I could see, there were very limited circumstances under which middle-class Ulster Protestants would call themselves Irish, and a lot of it centred around rugby. Mm-hmm. Because rugby is an all-Ireland sport, whereas soccer is there are two different teams. Also around boxing, which is really interesting.
Yes.
Because rugby is a sport really that is played, well, certainly for a long time was played in certain fee-paying schools, whereas boxing is completely different. You know, that's a very working-class thing. Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that they're playing at being Irish, that it's just like some kind
Play to be Irish.
Yeah, but I don't think Michael is. There's something else too, which is that Michael went to Trinity College in Dublin. And
so he must have had rudimentary Irish already. Or
well, he wouldn't have had any Irish. You wouldn't have needed. Trinity was it was a cold place for Catholics for a long time. And that was it was founded by Elizabeth the First, and very many Ulster Protestants went to Trinity College.
I didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I always thought that in the Republic you had to have a certain degree of knowledge in Irish to achieve anything.
No, not at all. There was a very swift way in for Protestants from the north to go there.
Okay.
The reason that a lot of Catholics didn't, many Catholics for a long time didn't go, was that they would be I think they were excommunicated by the Archbishop or something if they went there, because there was an oath of allegiance or something required.
Okay.
Yeah. So they wouldn't go. They all went to University College Dublin. So.
We have Milkman, a novel by Anna Burns, which was we won several prizes. We have Belfast Noir, crime fiction. We have Kenneth Branagh's Belfast, the film. We have Derry Girls, a Netflix series. It seems as if there's a kind of Belfast hype. And Rosemary Jenkinson, a writer from Belfast, complained about an unhealthy obsession with the troubles in Northern Irish fiction.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I'm not even going to say anything about that.
Which is saying enough.
Well, I mean, that's fine. I think Rosemary doesn't have to write about the troubles if she doesn't want to, but I don't really understand why she's terribly concerned about what anybody else feels that they'd like to write about.
To go a little bit deeper, the Good Friday Agreement or Belfast Agreement, whatever, is 25 years old. Will there ever be a time when the past is accounted for, or do you think it's still the beginning of accounting for what happened?
I think in some ways, I don't know. I mean, I really, really hope there's not going to be a return to violence, but I think there are some things that are going to be unavoidable in the next 10 or 20 years, and that is that under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, there will be a border poll. It was said that once enough people, the majority of people wanted a border in the north of Ireland wanted a border poll, there would be one, and Catholics now outnumber Protestants, so those days aren't, I think, very far away. But another thing that needs to be...
So now we have on the island a majority of Catholics.
Well, there was always on the island, there was always a majority of Catholics.
Oh, in Northern Ireland, sorry.
Yeah, but in Northern Ireland, in the north of Ireland, but another thing which is important to realise is that not every political party wanted the Good Friday Agreement or signed up to it. And the Democratic Unionist Party, which is the single... I think maybe Sinn Féin have just overtaken, but it's the single largest party to represent Protestants, Unionists, Loyalists. Didn't want the Good Friday Agreement, didn't sign up to it, and at the moment, for the last 3-4 years, have refused to be in government because of I think before it was about the Irish Language Act, and now there's some other carry on over Brexit. They were really enthusiastic about Brexit as well. So there's there's supposed to be a devolved government there, but there isn't, it doesn't function. Services are being very badly affected because the British government is continuing to drop money into an account that's supposed to be spent on services, but the deputies never ever meet to agree on how to spend it. They still accept their salaries, interestingly, but they don't actually go to work.
When I was living in Belfast in the early 80s, it was still that Northern Ireland was the country where everything worked. The Republic was where nothing worked. You had bad roads, you had no shopping opportunities. They switched roles in a way. Is that important?
Yeah, the North is falling apart. Yeah. There are... So, I suppose successive years of Tory governments in the UK have meant that the National Health Service, which really was something they should have been very proud of, is falling apart. But then there's the added problem in the north because some kind of auxiliary services aren't being funded as well. So there are all of those problems too. So Belfast city centre looks okay when you walk around it, and but I don't think
very Americanised.
That's very Americanised. Yeah, but Dublin is like that as well. It's all the same shops. It's all like Foot Locker and I don't know what else. Yeah, if you stray from the city centre and go you wouldn't need to go too far north or west or especially north or west, if you go towards Ardoyne or if you go up the Falls Road or the Shankill Road, they never, ever, ever saw the advantages or the supposed advantages of peace. There's a mental health crisis that's completely out of control, no services being provided. Many more people have died by suicide since the Good Friday Agreement was signed than died by violence during the Troubles. It's just there's lots of people with, I guess it's transgenerational trauma that's just not being dealt with at all. And poverty.
There's so much to talk about, but we are coming to the end, and I have two more questions. One, I just realized while following the translation that in the original there are no quotation marks, as far as I remember. They are in the German translation.
Are there?
There must be a reason. We should ask Claudia.
Did you put quotation marks in? Oh my God! That's just about me being, I don't know.
Why did you get rid of them?
Okay, so I try to be kind of tidy in my life, but I'm not really a very tidy person. I'm a bit chaotic. But I think it looks cleaner on the page not to have all of those little dashes, which is a really stupid reason.
It works surprisingly well.
Well, it also makes you have to work a lot harder as a writer to achieve clarity, to show who's speaking. Another thing that I think, or I hope that it has the effect, or certainly for me had the effect of bedding the dialogue really way more deeply into the text. And I think with this book, because it's written in the third person and it's like she does this, or Kushla does this, or she did, third person past tense. But I wanted it to be really, really, really closely from her point of view, so that at all times you're in, her head. So I don't know. I mean, it's not for me to say whether it worked or not, but that's why I did it. I'm doing it for the next one as well, I don't care, even though some people are complaining.
Okay. The last question, I think, maybe. The German writer Friedrich Schiller, when he started writing, he loved to have overripe apples in his drawer. He liked the smell. It stimulated his writing. When Kafka sat down to write, he always said, I hate it, I love it, I can't do without it. He called writing ein Teufelsdienst, the work of the devil.
That's funny.
Yeah. So how is it for you? Do you need stimulations to write? Do you want to run away before writing? Do you have a love-hate relationship? Do you have a loving relationship?
That's interesting. So I think the reason that I took to writing in the beginning was I didn't write a word until I was 47. I was a chef for almost 30 years, and a friend kind of bundled me into a car and drove me to a meeting of a new writing group that was being set up in the town where I live, and I had literally never written anything. But I was really embarrassed and stuttery. So when I was asked, everyone in the room was asked why they were there, and they were saying things like, oh, I have enough poems for a chapbook, or someone else was about to finish a memoir, and I went purple in the face with embarrassment and said, oh, I'm here because my mate made me come. And I just wanted to cry and run out of the room. But something in me must have been curious to even get into the car with her, really. And maybe to save face, and maybe because I had, I don't know, that maybe I just wanted to try to write something. I agreed to try to write a short story, and I had 5 weeks to do it because, someone was going to submit a story every week. And I went home and started trying to work on it. And within a couple of lines, I have no idea what happened to me. But I feel better when I'm doing it than when I'm not doing it. Maybe it has something to do with my relationship with language, because I don't speak the way that I did when I was a child. So the voice in my head is different from my speaking voice or something.
So you have a northern voice in your head and a southern voice.
Yeah, and it's not just an accent. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I speak with a southern accent. But I think that in my in my head anyway, I think it's a northern voice. Somebody told me that they just knew me from Twitter, and And then I got a message anyway from this woman, and she's from Belfast, and she said, I just heard you on the radio, and I nearly crashed my car because you're Southern, because she said even your tweets are Northern. But so I don't know how that is, but anyway, it just makes me feel more like myself when I'm writing. That isn't to say that I enjoy it all the time. Like, I do approach the laptop feeling like vomiting all over it very often. And then I just settle myself and get on with the work. And usually after a while, it's okay.
I remember a Scottish writer from Glasgow, James Kelman, saying, I am a writer because I have my problems with language. I like that. You don't become a writer because you don't have no problems with language.
No, I think that's probably true.
You fight with language. Yeah. Okay. So, and you don't give up the fight. You still write. Yeah. Next novel?
I've written a first draft of the next novel. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'll see you again.
Hopefully. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.